It's early enough that the day hasn't decided who you need to be yet. No roles, no expectations. Your phone is nearby but silent, not because there are no notifications, because you haven't looked. You sit there longer than usual, not moving, not thinking clearly either. This is the moment most people escape from. They grab noise, messages, music, anything to avoid sitting with themselves, because silence asks questions. In silence, you remember every promise you made and didn't keep, every plan that felt important for 1 week, then slowly disappeared. You don't feel failure, you feel distance. Distance between effort and excuse, between knowing and doing. And the most uncomfortable thought arrives quietly. Nothing external stopped you. Not lack of time, not lack of resources, just the habit of choosing ease. This is where change starts, not with action, but with the courage to stay awake in silence a little longer than yesterday. Later today, you will be busy. You always are. Busy looks productive from the outside. Inside, it feels like running without direction. You'll complete tasks, reply to messages, handle responsibilities. And somewhere between all of that, you'll postpone the one thing that actually matters, again. Not because it's hard, but because it asks something from you. Presence, focus, discomfort. This pattern didn't appear suddenly. It was built slowly, through small decisions that felt harmless. Skipping once, delaying twice, then calling it normal. You didn't become inconsistent by accident. You practiced it. And what you practice becomes familiar. What becomes familiar stops feeling wrong. This audiobook isn't here to motivate you. It's here to interrupt that familiarity, to make you notice the moments you usually rush past. Because discipline doesn't enter your life loudly. It enters quietly, right when you're about to avoid yourself again. Most days, you tell yourself the same thing. You don't have time. Your schedule looks full. Messages keep coming. Responsibilities stack one over another. By the end of the day, you feel legitimately tired. But there's something you quietly avoid noticing. After all that movement, the one thing that mattered most was never touched. Not because you forgot, but because starting it would have required focus without distraction. Busyness protects you from that moment. It makes you feel involved, even productive. It gives you a respectable reason to delay what actually demands courage. Being busy is easier than being honest. Honesty would force you to admit that time was there, energy was there. What was missing was the decision to sit with discomfort. So you managed the day instead, solved small problems, and postponed the one that could have changed the direction of your life. Comfort didn't stop you. It simply convinced you that you were doing enough. Comfort never looks dangerous at first. It looks reasonable. A short break, a small distraction, a reward you didn't question earning. And nothing collapses when you choose it. Your life keeps moving. Your world stays stable. That's why the pattern forms so quietly. Discomfort appears. You step away. Relief follows. Repeat this often enough and your body learns the shortcut. Not through logic, but through repetition. Soon, resistance doesn't feel like discipline. It feels wrong. Effort feels unnecessary. You stop seeing these moments as choices. They just feel like who you are. But identity isn't built by what you believe. It's built by what you repeatedly do when no one interrupts you. That's why discipline feels unnatural at first. Not because it's extreme, but because it breaks a system that has been running silently for years. Your life isn't shaped by your intentions. It's shaped by the response you've practiced in the quiet moments when comfort offered you an exit. There is a reason you haven't changed yet. And it has nothing to do with intelligence or potential. Your life still works. You can wake up, function, meet expectations, and survive the day. Nothing is collapsing. Nothing demands immediate intervention. That's the danger. Real change rarely begins in chaos. It begins in stability that slowly numbs ambition. You don't feel desperate enough to act. You feel comfortable enough to tolerate dissatisfaction. So you adjust. Lower expectations. Normalize frustration. You tell yourself this phase will pass, that someday motivation will return. But motivation doesn't arrive to comfortable lives. Here's the part that hurts to admit. If your life were slightly harder, you might have moved already. If the consequences were immediate, discipline would feel obvious. But slow damage doesn't alert the nervous system. It just blends into routine. Change doesn't feel urgent because your habits haven't punished you yet. They're still politely letting you remain exactly where you are. And as long as life continues to function, most people never interrupt it. That's why years pass quietly before regret becomes loud. Most people like the idea of discipline. They just don't like what it demands. Discipline doesn't ask for intensity. It asks for consistency without emotion. It doesn't care how motivated you feel. It doesn't negotiate with your mood. That's why it feels cruel at first. Because discipline removes excuses you've lived with for years. It exposes how often you waited to feel ready, how often you postponed effort until conditions felt perfect. And here's the truth that separates people. Those who change don't feel different. They act different before they feel different. They don't eliminate resistance. They stop listening to it. Discipline isn't heroic. It's repetitive, boring, uncomfortable in ways no one applauds. That's why it works. Most people are waiting for a version of themselves who feels confident enough to begin. That version never arrives. Confidence is the result, not the requirement. And the moment you stop negotiating with comfort, your identity begins to shift quietly, without drama, without permission, without asking if you're ready. There's one relationship in your life you rarely think about, but it's the one that suffers the most. The relationship with yourself. Not the confident future version you imagine, the present one. The person who makes plans and watches you ignore them. Every promise you didn't keep weakens something small but important. Not motivation, trust. You taught yourself that your word is flexible, that intentions can be revised, that delay is acceptable when no one is checking. Over time, this does something subtle. You stop relying on yourself. And when effort appears, doubt arrives with it. You don't ask, "What should I do?" You ask, "Will I actually do it this time?" That hesitation isn't laziness. It's a memory of inconsistency. Self-respect isn't built by confidence speeches. It's built by alignment, by decisions matching words, by showing up when quitting feels reasonable. Every time you follow through, something quiet strengthens. You don't feel proud immediately, but you feel grounded. That's how identity begins to repair itself, silently, through evidence. Becoming disciplined doesn't mean becoming intense. It means becoming predictable to yourself. Predictable in action, predictable in effort, predictable in follow-through. The strongest people aren't extreme. They're consistent. They don't rely on mood. They build systems that carry them through bad days. This is where people misunderstand identity. They think it changes after success, but identity shifts before results appear. It shifts when you keep small commitments even when they feel pointless, when no one knows, when no outcome is guaranteed yet. That's why discipline feels lonely. It removes witnesses. There's no reward in the beginning, only repetition. But repetition sends a message to the subconscious. I can be trusted. And when that belief settles in, behavior changes without force. You stop arguing with yourself. You stop renegotiating effort. Discipline becomes less of a demand and more of a standard. Not because life got easier, but because you became someone who doesn't walk away every time things require patience. That's the real transformation, when effort feels normal and quitting feels unfamiliar. At some point, discipline stops feeling important. Not because you abandoned it, but because it no longer asks for emotional effort. You still wake up early some days. You still choose effort when comfort is available. But there's less inner debate. The voice that once argued with you has grown quieter. Not defeated, just ignored. This is what progress actually looks like. Not excitement, not constant motivation, but stability. Pause. Your days don't feel heroic. They feel intentional. You don't identify as disciplined. You simply act in ways that align with where you're going. Some days pass without noticeable change. And that's the point. Real transformation doesn't announce itself. It blends into routine. You still have distractions. You still feel resistance. But they no longer control direction. You move forward anyway. And for the first time, life feels less reactive, less scattered. Not because it slowed down, but because you stopped negotiating every decision with comfort. There is nothing dramatic waiting ahead. No moment where everything suddenly becomes easy. There will be days when effort feels heavier again. Days when old habits try to return. Days when skipping looks reasonable. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're still human. The difference now is simple. You recognize the moment. You notice the exit before taking it. Discipline doesn't remove difficulty. It removes confusion. It keeps your direction clear when emotion tries to interfere. You don't need to think about becoming better anymore. You just need to continue. One choice at a time. One follow-through at a time. Without asking if today feels special enough. This audiobook doesn't end with a command. It ends with a reminder. You don't rise to the level of your intentions. You settle into the level of your standards. And now you know where those standards are built. In the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when continuing is the only thing left to do.